guess I'm your MC tonight, and so thanks to Tom O'Connor for the opportunity, and a warm welcome to you on this unseasonably warm Wednesday evening. It was pretty nice following that rain. A couple of things about Hub Bellarine, and this is our first one, and I guess the best way to introduce it is to talk about the parallels between TED Talks that you might have seen, which is a not-for-profit run series of talks by people in our community about a topic of interest to generate thought, discussion and interaction. So that's a key bit. Tom's doing that on purpose so that I can remind everyone to turn off the phones. But and Q&A, which is a great program on the ABC that I enjoy because of the interaction that it generates with an audience. And we can't all get to go to a live TED Talk, or we can't, and it's very one way watching a TED Talk on the internet, and you can't all get into the audience with Q&A. But one of the interesting things about these topics is that there's a lot of stuff that gets imposed on us as citizens and as members of a community that we just get to sit there and take, and we don't often get a chance to actually hear from others about how they think it's impacting them and what their thoughts are about it. And I know there's a couple of things impacting on the Bellarine and Drysdale, the ring road around Drysdale, which is going to pass just past here, calling for forums, but a lot of times it seems that you go to those things without actually getting a chance to express your opinion openly. And so the purpose of these hub chats is to hear from some engaging speakers and interesting speakers about topics that are of interest to them, and to then consider your position in the local community and to understand or start to think deeply about what is it about that I think, and then from that ask a couple of questions, and then we move on to our second speaker, and then after we've had some Q&A, there's a chance to mingle both before the chat and after the chat, just to continue that discussion. We are videotaping these discussions with the view that we would load them onto the internet so that we can build up a series of programs, and yeah, and that's kind of about it. My role is to basically keep us on time and to direct and focus questions from the audience. My background, I've been in facilitation and training development for about a long time, you can tell from the colour of my hair, and I deal with corporates and not-for-profits around what it is they're doing strategically, and so this is kind of in the sweet spot of what I do. Tomorrow I'm working with a bank that's got a big red star in the front door, and the week after I'm working with an organisation called World Vision, and I've done some work with the United Nations and a couple of other people that is just really interesting work, and so this stuff is of real interest to me, and I hope it's of interest to you. So with that in mind, I would like to introduce our first speaker, and we're joined tonight by Dr. Lynn Reader. Lynn's a business development consultant in higher education with the Federation University Australia, and she's a board director of Australia 21 and has extensive experience in policy development and relationship management. She's worked at the University of Melbourne and the ANU in both academic and administrative roles, and previously on a number of major research projects, including with the Committee for Economic Development of Australia on a project, a long-term economic strategy for Australia. Can you please welcome Dr. Lynn Reader?
Thanks very much, Greg. So I'm really thrilled to be here tonight on this first Bellarine Hub Chat. It's a very exciting initiative, and I'd like to congratulate Tom and everyone involved with bringing this to fruition. When I was getting a briefing from Tom, he mentioned that the format, as Greg said, is that of a TED Talk, to inspire and to get people thinking. So it's of interest that my talk this evening is based on some of the work of Karen Armstrong, who won the International TED Talk of the Year a few years ago. I was invited to speak here tonight in part because Tom had heard a radio interview with Professor Bob Douglas on a project that Australia 21 was undertaking on the notion of the public interest. Along with well-known Australian Professor Fiona Stanley and Paul Barrett, who was a former Secretary of the Department of Defence and an Executive Director of the Business Council of Australia, Bob Douglas set up Australia 21 in 2001. I'm a member of the board of Australia 21, and Australia 21 is a multidisciplinary research company that recently reviewed the notion of the public interest in the context of what some would say is today's less than functional political system. Australia 21 is not affiliated with any political party or interest group. I just wanted to say that. What it does is bring together thinkers from all sectors of society to explore current evidence and from that develop new frameworks of understanding for the future challenges facing us. Recently, the Australia 21 board identified public interest and its defence as an issue requiring a new national focus. So for this public interest project, and this is the copy of the publication, 39 notable Australians from diverse disciplines were invited to write on the public interest, which was defined as taking into consideration the welfare and well-being of the whole population. The public interest is a multifaceted concept, but one worth examining, and one that Swinburne University's Leadership Institute also recently reviewed. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that study. So it's a benchmark study to contribute to the renewal of leadership for the greater good in Australia. The survey examines Australians' belief about the nation's leaders and citizens. So in the context of the public interest, it's relevant to cite this Swinburne survey of over 800 Australian adults. And what it found was that Australian leaders were thought to care more for their own self-interest and those of close supporters than that of the wider community. The Swinburne survey found that Australians as a whole value leaders whom they believe are committed to making decisions that are in the interests of all Australians and not letting the unintended consequences of any policy decision to unfairly impact on any one group. That they care for the long-term future of the country, including the needs of future generations, and that they value leaders that can maintain the social, economic, environmental systems, in other words, the commons upon which community well-being depends. So for this short presentation, what I'm going to do is provide you with some of the key ideas from 4 of the contributors to this essay volumes. And they're going to be John Hewson, Fred Chaney, Kim Williams, and in this esteemed group, humbly myself. So John Hewson, in his essay, which was entitled Politics at the Expense of the Public Interest, lamented that the Australian electorate is increasingly disenchanted with and feels disenfranchised by the 2 major political parties, whom he feels are preoccupied with themselves in attempting to score short-term political points. He stated that politics is seen as a game, focused on winning the daily media where special interests can have undue influence. He says quite strongly in his essay that politics has become very short-term, disturbingly personal, negative, populist and opportunistic. So you could argue that it's easier to say that on the outside of politics than on the inside of politics, but it's interesting that he makes that point. So in his essay he asked, are we to conclude that the debasement of politics and the processes of government have now blurred the electorate's understanding of the public interest, of what is good for their long-term welfare and well-being? We need people to focus on the public interest, as hard as that is to specify. And that was one of the issues coming out of this publication, you know, just what is the definition. So the second person I'm going to refer to is Fred Chaney. Fred Chaney, who I have a lot of regard for, and who was a former minister in the Fraser government, in his essay entitled The Problem Is Us, reflected on whether powerful representative voices, such as those from groups like the BCA, Chamber of Commerce, Small Business Association, the ACTU, Council of Social Services, Australian Conservation Foundation, in other words, the big lobby groups that we have in Australia, can they support decisions made for the broad rather than the narrow interest? Will these groups countenance making compromises of the sorts governments must, if the public, of the sort governments must if the public interest is to be served? In making this point, Fred Chaney is challenging us to be part of the solution. So he notes or asks the question, can the community be brought to push immediate self-interest aside and to support the public rather than sectional interest? The problem, like the solution, therefore, lies as much with what is outside politics and government as what is inside. So we all have to be part of the solution. The third speaker was Kim Williams. Kim Williams is the former Chief Executive of News Corp, Foxtel and the Australian Film Commission. In his essay, Arts and the Public Interest, he noted a number of recent negative policy trends, and he included that money being treated as the measure of value in all things rather than just one of the many values that should be taken into account or measures. Politicians and their bureaucracies increasingly debasing creativity and intellect as the vital crucibles of our national future, and celebrating the anti-intellectual and the triumph of general ignorance over considered, respectful debate, which aims to test ideas and assumptions so as to arrive at evidence-support outcomes. Kim Williams commented that our society is increasingly governed by characteristics that are profoundly unhelpful to, indeed destructive of, improvement and clear direction in national policy formation. So quite strong comments. For my essay, my contribution to this essay volume, I drew in part on a recent conference that I attended at Stanford University in the middle of Silicon Valley. Here was a conference on the science of compassion. It stated that any review of the public interest should consider the aspects of human regulatory systems being articulated within evolutionary biology and neuroscience. I don't have time to go into this in depth, but essentially what these disciplines are saying are that some of our newly evolved mind competencies, such as capacity for self-awareness, self-reflection, reasoning, imagination and planning, have not yet freed themselves from our underlying survival insecurities and anxieties. Neuroscience research is saying that as a species, we are a species that search for individuality, but also for connectedness and belonging. As far as we know, we are the only species for millions of light years in any direction that are capable of a deep level of self-awareness. So a key message that modern science provides is that our evolved design is not necessarily a good design. And that's because it says because for any trait to evolve, it simply has to outrun or outcompete other designs. So there's an old joke that says, you don't have to run faster than the wolf. You only have to run faster than your friend. And we see this behaviour in our survival cells. When we see say an example of that is, financial traders who are trying to outdo each other and have brought down whole banking systems and wiped out significant superannuation funds. So they're extreme examples of when people are, in their survival system. But we are often in our survival system in our day-to-day life. So, when we cheat on tests or when we aggressively cut in front of someone who we think has pushed into the line on the road, there are whole ways in which we're involved in that in our daily lives. So my essay noted that improving public interest outcomes will require a greater focus on community well-being and social connectedness, recognition of our interdependence, and the increase in scientific data demonstrating that significant benefits of compassion and integrated behaviour are important components in progressing societal well-being. Higher levels of social connection support more trusting and cooperative behaviour, and as a consequence, recipients are more open and trusting in return. So this is not new research, which is interesting. Apparently, Charles Darwin in The Descent of Man argued that communities that included the greatest number of sympathetic members would flourish best and produce the greatest number of offspring. So coming back to the Stanford conference, which, as I mentioned, was focused on the science of compassion, it was addressed by 4 US mayors who had signed the Compassionate Cities program. So these mayors referenced a model that was developed as part of the Charter of Compassion. And the Charter of Compassion was set up by Karen Armstrong with the funds that she was awarded when she won the Best TED Talk for 2008. So the Charter is now working with over 270 cities worldwide to create a network of people caring about the ways in which their communities work for the well-being of all. The Charter states that creating a compassionate city requires 2 kinds of leadership: from the bottom up, so through places of work and community groups, businesses and schools, and from the top down, from all levels of government. Today, over 270 cities and communities across the world are using the Charter to build a fresh vision for their societies, motivated by the ancient and universal rule to treat others as you would like to be treated. Communities of people across the globe are committing to making compassion a driving force with measurable impact on community life and on the well-being of community members. I only have time tonight to give one example of how a city is engaging once they've signed up to be a compassionate city. And that is an example of Louisville in the US, which a year or 2 ago called for a week of compassionate acts. And it stunned organisers with the volume of participants it drew. The city had an ambitious goal of enrolling 50,000 people, but expectations grew to 75,000 as the week drew near. And as sign-up continues, ultimately 90,000 people participated by volunteering during that 1 week. Population of Louisville is just on 600,000, which means that 1 in 6 of the city's population participated. And these are some of the things that they did. So they packaged over 33,500 meals for needy children. They helped clean up, 9,000 people helped clean up. Over 8,000, nearly 9,000 shoes were donated, the sales of which supported safe drinking water around the world. Over 3,000 books were donated for grade level reading material. 950 people gave blood. Over 200 trees were planted in 14 of the city's parks. 7 tonnes of medical supplies and equipment were sorted by volunteers and delivered to a Mexican community of 20,000 to establish its first medical facility. All up, over 100,000 plus hours of community service was done during that week. So even evolutionary biologists are saying that the challenge of our humanity is to understand our minds better and to cultivate the conditions that support our ability to nurture ourselves, others, and the planet on which we live. So the meaning of greater good or public interest will continue to evolve as our understanding expands in terms of what it means to be human and how our evolution continues to impact on the world we create. Neuroscience is now telling us that where we put our attention has major implications for the questions we ask and the perspectives we take. So I wish you well with these hub discussions, designed as they are to direct your attention to some of the key issues facing us today. Thank you.
So let's take some questions from... What questions have you...
Then I was interested in your the idea of people can be in survival mode in any domain of their life. Can you talk a little bit more about how that actually affects what motivates people and the decisions they make when they are in that survival mode?
Yeah.
And then what takes them out of that?
So, yeah, really interesting. I actually run workshops on that because what they're saying, people like Paul Gilbert, who's written The Compassionate Mind and Compassion Meditation, what they're finding is that we have three emotion regulatory systems. We have our threat and survival system, we have our drive and our achievement system, and we have our soothing, what they call our soothing and affiliation system. And over the top of that, we now have a brain that can plan, overthink, really sort of review the world, but do it in not helpful ways sometimes. So, the example they give is, on the prairie, if there's a zebra and there's a lion there, the zebra will only be stressed for as long as they can see or smell the lion. So as long as they can smell the fear. We now have a brain that goes over the top of that and can ruminate and worry about things like, the zebra will just be gone. We'll be saying, oh, there was only one lion here today. What about tomorrow? It could be two, and why am I living here anyway? I shouldn't be here. I know there are lions here and I'm still here. So what they're saying is that our threat and survival system and our drive and our achievement system turn up automatically. That's the result of our evolved, system, of our human system. But our soothing system and our affiliation system needs to be trained and developed. So we, instead of dealing with, something coming and feeling threatening to us, and then we just, respond to it by thinking if we do things bigger, quicker, faster, smarter, that'll get over that. We actually need to be moving into this soothing system and our affiliation system, which is really more into integration and connection with others. And that's what in the meditation that I do, then that's part of that process of really consciously being aware of where we are in our system. Something's happened. Usually our automatic response will be our threat and a survival response. And then we need to be very conscious and move. And they're not saying any of these systems are bad or good, they're all important. If you're being attacked, you need your survival system turned on immediately. Trouble is, we've got it on too much of the time, and we're not connecting with others in the way that is going to be useful, as a species moving forward, which I find really interesting.
Similar to that in terms of the impact of fear that's spread every night at 6 o'clock through the... So when people go, I need some soothing, I'll sit in front of the news, and then they're hyper-stimulated, which gets the fear centre going. It's counterintuitive around what they should do.
Yes.
Could do.
Yeah, well, I think again it's that being aware. Sometimes, we need to have time out as well. But yeah, being aware of when you're being stressed is really important, and being able to switch. I think that's the important thing. It's that sort of conscious choice to move between our systems, but making sure that part of our system is our soothing system. Yeah, we're our quietening. You know, we're not just on all the time. Because, you know, I know the health economists are saying in the next 10 years the greatest spend in the health sector will be on mental health. You know, we actually need to be really conscious of what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Because that's the problem now, I think, is the connectivity of our modern world now.
Yeah.
I'm a professional driver and I just see people driving to and from work.
Yeah.
And, 75 to 90% of those people have a mobile phone on their lap or something like that. They've got to be, that connectivity is there all the time, almost 24 hours a day. Whereas, as you were saying, that we shouldn't be connected all the time. We need to disconnect for a period of time, perhaps every day, to have that soothing and sit back and reflection on what we're about and where we're going and how we're doing things, and how it impacts on the community itself.
Yes. Yeah.
Just an observation, sorry I came in late. We came from a small country town to Drysdale about 30 years ago, and Drysdale had all those things you're encouraging. The recent urbanisation of all these centres around Melbourne, we've gone from rural to an urban, and they're breaking down all those conditions we aim for. They're harder to achieve, and those are the people who aren't here tonight because they're busy doing the 9 to 5s. Like on the weekend, I took a load of hay up to the neighbours on the other farm, and the commuters honk their horns at me driving a slow truck. I can't go any faster. If I spill a load of hay, I'll block up the whole road. But they just don't get it. And
that's common sense. Common sense is not common now.
And it's urbanisation and the 9 to 5 mentality.
And we need to try and get back to, families need to be able to try and get back to that common sense, that they don't, with this connected world, they don't do that because they're busy being connected to the outside world. Perhaps not to their families.
Is that then as a direct result of the disconnect from a political party perspective as well? So, you know, your open comments around the self-interest. So, is it that we've actually lost the direction from the political parties and that they then haven't had the ability to change with the times and therefore have an impact?
Well, I argue in my essay that, in fact, our politics, and certainly Paul Gilbert, people like that too, argue that our current political system is very much based in our threat system and drive and achievement system. So we actually don't know what, you know, at this stage, what politics might look like if we were sort of more in our affiliation system.
So we're more likely to be aware of public interest if we're in our affiliation mode. Is that what you're saying?
I think it would be easier to access, yes, yeah. One of the things that I want to do now is actually do a bit of a project to test that, and we're looking at doing empathy conversations between people who are in financial difficulties and people who are in position to make decisions about policy, and really taking them through this process and developing these empathy conversations and then seeing what some of the outcomes, how different they might be from doing it that way than from just doing it. You know, I know one of the people on our committee is another academic at Virginia, but her husband is very senior in the Department of Welfare, and you know, he said we just don't talk to people. You know, we're making policy for them, but we actually don't talk to them. So this idea came from a book called Empathy. I think it's called A Radical Revolution. But and there's an example where they have these phone conversations. So the Israelis and the Palestinians. So families who have lost members in the war, so particularly parents who have lost children in the war, are actually able to ring and talk to each other and get a sense that, you know, their loss and their, you know, sadness and their world being torn apart is the same for both sides, you know.
I think they're losing the ability to communicate with each other. And if I can make an example that's very newsworthy at the moment is the two political parties in Victoria at the moment, where the previous political party put in place a $20 billion development, and then the government changed, and the now incumbent government says no, we're not going to do that. So we're going to. It's a simple lack of communication between those two governments or those two political parties that now end up in a mess. And we're sitting here. I'm sitting here in the middle of it, shaking my head. Why?
Well, yeah,
and we're not getting anywhere.
Yeah, and I think that was a challenge from Fred Chaney, that we're all in this together and we can't just, point over there and say, if only they, could get it right, and I think, this is the importance of these hub discussions really, to say how do we get involved, because, we know politics is a reflection of what people are prepared to connect with and, so,
Why wasn't there communication between the two governments before these systems were put in place?
Yeah, well, that's the system we have at the moment. That's the issue.
That needs to change.
Yeah, that's right.
Can
Yeah.
I zoom out of that for a second and
Yeah.
just, we're quite tight for time. But, so one of the interesting things then is around this need to be affiliative and the benefits of that, and then the idea that it's the fastest, and it would be faster than the other candidate, more popular than the other candidate to get your
That's right.
opinion.
Exactly. It's
Too.
very much tribal. Yeah.
So where do we start as a community, at a community level, based on Fred Chaney's view that it starts with us and we're all part of the picture? What's the one thing that we can walk away from tonight thinking about or doing in relation to that?
Yeah.
Is that a good question to ask a group?
Yeah.
So let's wrap. Could you please thank Dr. Lynn Reader for her great And before we transition into the next speaker, I'll ask you to have that discussion with your next door neighbour. Could you please introduce yourself and to have that discussion about, that's all interesting, but so what? What do we do? Where do we start? What's the one thing we can do walking away from here? Please have that chat.
Probably got some Australia brought science. He's just returned from East Timor. It has a huge process. They are so very, very connected for us.
Well, look, the discussion jumping in too long over the sea. Really, couldn't agree more. And it's as simple as that. And I think it's all going to come down, cracking down around our ears before we wake up to ourselves and say, this has got us nowhere.
So our desire to be informed is actually going to lead to a potential demise of something, of sorts.
And in particular, for our young people who are screaming out for guidelines and policies, saying, as parents and adults, we're struggling to be able to provide them with all of that, given technology is changing and it's accessible.
Probably prefer to sit on terrace and bus. And even though people that are really focus on family, it's amazing how
And that's the other influences, obviously, that are in their life. And they see, even at 7.
Yeah, well, we don't live in a vacuum.
Yeah.
They go to school, don't they?
But how is it different though to when, as I probably said, we were on relatively similar age? How is it different to when we were at school and the fads that came and went at that stage? Things like jeans and things like shoes and things like hairdos and all those sorts of things. Is today's technology just a different
Okay.
Decided.
Lynn is going to hang around after our second speaker as well, so she'll be available to have a bit of a discussion at the end of the evening before we leave the building. I'm delighted to introduce our second speaker for this evening, Father Kevin Dillon. He's the parish priest of Geelong St Mary's of the Angels Basilica, and it's been written that Dillon considers himself a conservative priest who'd always liked the middle of the road and is a reluctant rebel. I wonder how he sees himself. Could you please welcome Father Kevin Dillon?
Thanks very much, Greg. And it's it was a tag I was given in an article that Arnie Schwartz wrote in The Age last year, and it's probably pretty right in the sense that I suppose as you get older, you can have the privilege of being a bit more rebellious than you might have been in younger years. But thanks for the opportunity, Tom. Tom and I went to school together, would you believe? He was about 25 years ahead of me, but maybe not one or 2 years ahead of me. But we went to De La Salle College in Malvern. So it's been great to catch up with Tom, and his enthusiasm and his vision, particularly for this part of the country, is very infectious, really. And so when he asked me to participate tonight, I was delighted to do so. I did look up, you might have seen it on Saturday in the Advertiser, there was a little news item about it. I found it online, and there was one comment afterwards, which I'll read to you, from Rob of Bellarine. Rob, are you there, Rob? No. Rob of Bellarine wrote, "Another group of unelected do-gooders and talk-festers telling us what they think is good for us." So it's a pity if Rob hasn't come, because I'm sure, I don't know about my presentation, but certainly he would have had a lot to think and work through, much more than the talk-fest of what we've had to date from Lynn and the various contributors. The whole notion of online comments is a fascinating one in terms of the capacity of the ordinary person to put their point of view into a much broader spectrum. There could be people over in Buenos Aires or Manila looking at Rob's comment, or any number of other ones now. It's just amazing the effect of the internet. I actually, some of you might be aware, I pen a little article for the Geelong Addy every Friday. Sometimes it's a delight, and sometimes it's a bit of a chore in the sense of getting a deadline or having something to write about. But a little while back I went back through the online thing to look at the comments, which is sort of interesting in a way, and some articles drew no comments and some drew a few. But there was one particular name kept coming up, which I won't mention, but he had his full name, and he had about 4 or 5 cracks at me. What would he know about it? This is a load of rubbish, and he should stick to the Bible or something like that. And so I thought, oh well, I'm not into. In a bit of devilment, I actually sort of, I looked him up in the phone book to see if I could find him. I was going to give him a call, but I couldn't find him. But when I Googled down, because they say it's the height of arrogance to Google your own name, but that's the way I found it within the Advertiser site. And there came up an article that Keith Fagg had written, in which he mentioned me a while back. And here's a comment from the same guy, and he was all for me. He said, "Oh, this guy's all right." So, which is fascinating, because what he was saying was, he might think in any particular week that what I write is a load of rubbish, or he might think it's terrific, but that's business. The other stuff was personal. In other words, he said, I got a regard for this fellow, even if he talks rubbish sometimes. And that's really important about ideas. And what I thought was terrific about, as I done a little bit of work, not much, on, but enough to look at, you know, what's trying to be accomplished here. It's about ideas, and ideas and innovation are just so important. When you think of it, everything that we do and everything that we have is based because somebody sometime said once, why can't we do this? So I've got a public address system here. Now, you know when you watch the old movies, and here's Julius Caesar assembled in front of the troops, and you know, and he's got thousands of troops as far as the eye can see, and he's yelling out at them, you know. Or it's Mel Gibson, you know, they can take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom. He was in Ballarat yesterday, did you see that? And whatever. Well, in reality, you probably wouldn't have heard it 35 metres away. But that's the way Hollywood does it, and fair enough. But sometime, maybe 100 years ago, somebody said, wouldn't it be great if we could invent something that you could talk into and people could hear it from even a very large distance? Somebody said, why can't we do that? Somebody said maybe some time ago, we got a grocer shop, we got a greengrocer shop, and we've got newsagents. Wouldn't it be great if we put them under one big roof, so people just had to come to one place? And what about something to put all the stuff in? So let's invent something they carry around. And well, if they've got a lot of stuff, well, maybe we might put something on wheels and they can walk around with it and so on. And all the old people will think it's fantastic because they won't fall over and so on. So many different ideas. Everything that somebody thought one day, let's put a shed down at Drysdale and we'll call it the potato shed, and it'll be this great community centre. Ideas are just so important, and innovation. It's got to be practical, and we've got to think them through. It doesn't always happen straight off. The story of the guy was driving along the freeway one day, and this chicken runs past his car, and which is pretty good because he was driving about 60 or k, and so he sped up, and the chook keeps going. He goes faster and faster, and as he goes, and he eventually goes past him. And as he goes past him, he sees he's got 3 legs. And this chicken's going whoosh, you know, so I think this is a bit all right. So the chicken takes the off-ramp, and so he thinks, this is look at this one you could do with, he was aware of the fact that chicken legs are a great commodity. So if you could get 3 chicken legs out of a chicken instead of 2, well, you know, wouldn't that be fantastic for business? So he follows the chicken, and he eventually catches up with it, and he goes into this little farm, and it says, you know, Ned's Chicken Farm, and he says, well, I'm in the right place. He's gone back home. So he sees the chicken farmer, and he says, I saw this chicken, that is fantastic. He said, I'm thinking you and I could go into business because I know a bit about how to run a business. He said, we think we can get 3 legs instead of 2 out of every chook. He said, what do they taste like? And the guy said, I don't know. He said, why don't you know? He said, I haven't been able to catch one yet to be able to cook it. So he hadn't quite thought it through. So you've got to think it through to be able to get it really to work. But every day, you and I can pick up the newspaper, or we can watch a program on television, but particularly the newspapers, especially the letters. The letters are great because they are the voice of ordinary people. People sit around their dinner table the night before and they say, why can't they do that? Why can't they do something else? And then now, of course, you can get on the computer and it's there within seconds to go in the paper the next day. Read through the papers and you'll see all sorts of ideas. You'll see lots of opinions, sure, but you will also see some ideas. And it's those ideas which you might think, no idea, no, what's the sense of that? But it might be that every now and again somebody says, hey, that can really work. I picked a couple out of the paper just today. The Geelong Advertiser talked about too many empty seats at the footy. Apparently they didn't get the crowd. They got only about 23,000 for a home game. And I suppose if they'd known the result, it would have been even less. But they said, it's too expensive. Well, have a think about that. You know, maybe that's right. Maybe if people are being charged an unaffordable amount, they're saying, well, I can't go, I'll stay home and watch it on telly or whatever. Another one, also on the footy, bring back Bomber Thompson for the coaching staff. Not necessarily the silliest idea in town. Goodness gracious, I mean, he did pretty well for a few years here, and he's just sitting there doing special comments on 3AW at the moment. So, you know, whether it'll happen, I don't know, but somebody's put it out there. So you think about these things. Somebody wrote about education on drug use, on ice. And this was interesting. I mean, the word education gets used so much, but I wonder, in all of these things, we talk about the social implications of drugs. I wonder how often young people, for example, are taught about just what it does physically to you. I can remember years ago as a seminarian, I went to training for the priesthood. I went to the morgue and I saw some lungs of a smoker. Remember those ads that the anti-smoking ads on television? Well, I saw them for real. This wasn't on television. And I'll tell you what, I had never smoked before because I was asthmatic as a kid. But I'll tell you what, any remote chance I might have had of becoming a smoker was doomed that day when I saw these lungs of a smoker. I thought, no way, Jose, am I going down that path. So that was another letter that was there in the Addy today. The Age had a couple of the need for companies to be good citizens. Quite a good letter in the letters page to the Age about that. Now, a lot of companies do that, take that very seriously. Some don't. It's all about self-interest. No smoking near schools, but what about trucks? This was someone who lived near a school where trucks were driving past, belching smoke and carbon monoxide, I think. Is that right, Chris? And so on. And one which resonated with me because even in my 70th year last year, I said in one of my articles in the Advertiser that people, and I just got my driver's licence the other day for the next 10 years, mind you. That means I'll be on the road when I'm 80, and that's okay, but maybe I should have been checked up on before then. I just rocked into Vic Roads. I didn't have to do an eye test. I didn't have to do an intelligence test. I didn't have to do a hearing test. I just paid the money and I'm right for the roads for the next 10 years. They said, well, you know, maybe we should be a bit more careful. I remember I wrote an article about for the Addy, and boy, did that raise a few hackles. But anyway, I don't want to be a risk to anybody else. But there it was. There are a number of ideas out there that can make a difference. And that's why something like this is really so valuable and so important. I'll tell you a couple of things that I have a bit of a passion about as just ideas. Who knows? And again, I've given expression to them within the pages of the Advertiser. It's handy to get on your hobby horse from time to time. One was that driving from Melbourne, from Geelong to Melbourne or vice versa, the Princess Highway, and the Vic Roads again, tell you drowsy drivers die, pull over and have a rest. Where? Where would you pull over and have a rest other than the two service stations, which are always pretty? There's one at Werribee and there's one at Little River or thereabouts, and that's about it. You won't take your life in your hands if you pull over anywhere else, I tell you. Yeah, you certainly want to pull over in those little help phone things, one of those, let alone at night. And you know, there's plenty of room. They could be rated and provided, and solar lights and made safe and so on. But so that created a bit of interest. Somebody wrote in, I'm sure it works for Vic Roads. You could tell by the way they wrote it. But and on a similar way, what was the other one? Oh yes, last Friday I had to go to Melbourne. I was supposed to go to Melbourne for a meeting, and I just got in. I said Mass at 7 o'clock. Came back in. Ross and John were on, and they said the bridge is blocked. absolutely blocked from its truck on fire. It was blocked yet again a bit further up at Werribee. There was something going on. So I just gave it away altogether. Thank goodness I heard that particular reference. It was the only reference they made until about 8:10 when the news had been over. A 24-hour radio station which gives incessantly all the traffic reports. Now, somebody says, when I wrote about that in the Advertiser, somebody says, oh, haven't you ever heard of the web or whatever? Well, what about going on the web when you're actually on the road? You'd like to know, before you actually get to the pointed little river where you come to a standstill, you'd like to know, hey, maybe this journey is worth getting off and making alternative arrangements. Now, they're just ideas, but they're just mine. What would I know? Maybe something, maybe a lot. What would you know? You have discussions around your own dinner table, you hear discussions at work, somebody throws something up at morning tea while it's at work, and you think, hey, that could work. That is the value of these sort of things. All due respects to Rob of Bellarine, that this is not just a talk fest. This is a sharing of ideas, of innovative ideas, and throughout history, people have said, why can't we do this better? Why can't we invent something? I'll just tell you one little invention that took a long time to get going, but has made a difference. And I was in the parish at St John's at Mitcham, and we had a big fete there every year in November, and we had a big shed. It was full of stuff for the fete. There were stuff for the stalls and trestles and all sorts of gear and so on. Up the road was North Ringwood Parish, and they had a big fete every year, and they had a shed full of stuff as well. And further up the road was Ringwood Parish, and they had a shed full of stuff. I thought, this is ridiculous. We've got all this stuff that we use once a year. Wouldn't it be better if we put it all into a couple of containers and it could move from one place to the other? So it took 10 years to get the idea. Yeah, great idea, you get it going, and if it's any good, we'll join. So it's often a bit hard to get it going, but eventually it did happen, and we all combined together for what we called a travelling fete. And it comes down here, it comes to Geelong, comes to Moolap State School had it, Moolap Primary School had it, Torquay College had it. The Catholics were given first bite of the cherry, but because it was too darn slow, some of the state schools got in. So out of about 23 members, about at least a third of them are government schools. But the idea is that, and I think Lynn was talking about this towards the end of her presentation too, that we get together. You can do things together far better than on your own. We tend to be so, if I can use a church word, so parochial. We just think of our own little turf. Whether it's the political parties saying the first rule of politics is to get elected and the second rule is to get re-elected. That's got to go out the window somewhere along the line in terms of all those things that Lynn was referring to in her talk. To get that broader vision of, again, the common good, and to realise that we can do things together if we pool our ideas. Just chatting beforehand with Greg and Craig and a couple of others, and just talking about the role of the church. And I more and more am convinced that the role of the church has got to be less, and we probably invented the word parish. It's a church word, but parish and parochial, meaning narrow, confined, restricted borders. We've got to look at things a lot differently. And the role of the church, whether it's my own individual church or the broader churches in the community, is to recognise that we're all part of the total community, and we've got to work together and realise that there are so many things that the churches do and can do and should do, which are also though part of a broader social responsibility of the wider community. So we don't just have our own little Catholic thing, we don't even have just our own little church thing. We say, hey, we can all do this together. What motivates you here might be different things, but we can do it so much better if we work together. That's why I really commend the initiative of tonight, and I hope it continues, and I certainly hope it can grow, because I think the exchange of ideas within a community setting is just terrific. We probably don't know it because we're here, but it's often said that the whole Geelong region, very much including Bellarine, has probably got a greater degree of volunteer and community engagement than possibly anywhere else in the country. That is fantastic. And it is a crown jewel that we've got here. So I welcome tonight. I'm honoured to be here at the very beginning, and I hope to look on and see this particularly important initiative really flourish. Thanks for listening.
What questions have we got for Father Dylan around? So, Tom?
Father Q. As Barney said, you know, that rebellious streak, I thought you were pretty moderate tonight, actually, but be that as it may, do you think that you would be a rebellious or a more rebellious person if you were married? And if so, do you think that, you know, looking 5 and 10 years ahead, do you think priests will eventually be married?
Well, it's already there in some cases. In one of the many amazing inconsistencies that exist in human life and in the Catholic Church as well, there are quite a number of married priests who have come across to the Catholic Church from Anglicanism and have brought their wives and their families with them. In terms of me, would I be more rebellious? I don't know. I might be under the thumb of my wife, and who knows, I might be less. You're not going to say that this week. Don't you dare say that from the pulpit. You know, who would know? Would I be more? It's hard from a personal perspective, particularly at my age. But would I have been a more effective priest had I been married? Perhaps. Probably in some areas, yes. Would I have been able to work the hours that I work? No. Obviously, but it's not just a work thing. But there is one of the problems, I think, and this is why I will be a bit rebellious. Sometimes it's often put that celibacy is a freely chosen gift. Well, no. I can tell you now, I didn't choose celibacy. I accepted it. If I wanted to, when I'm on my way home, I've got to get some petrol. So I go in and I fill the car up. Now, I don't choose to pay. I would much rather get my petrol for nothing. But I accept the fact that paying is an integral part of basic honest behaviour and the way in which the whole system works in order that petrol's there for everybody. So I think there will always be people, not just in the area of the work of the Church or the Catholic Church, there will always be people who may choose not to marry for any number of different reasons. The difficulty that's been there, and it's been there obviously for a long time, is the fact that it is imposed. You want to be a priest? This is what you've got to do. Now, sure, there are lots of areas in life where conditions apply. That happens to be one of them. It is not an easy condition to apply to yourself when you may be in your mid-20s, and it can be a bit of a battle because you really don't know, what's happening or what life might bring. One of the things that I really value as I look across my life, and I believe that there's been many times where I felt that the good Lord has intervened, and I felt He intervened in that area in the sense that about 21 years of age, I was working at St Vincent's Hospital as an orderly, would you believe, and working on a day-to-day basis with some very lovely young women, and one of them with whom I was smitten. Now, I found that a real struggle. I had to make a choice as to whether I would or would not continue down the path I was at. I was about halfway through my preparation for the seminary, and I have no idea to this day how she felt about me. It's the old adage says we were just good friends, and we were. But you know, I think it was important for me to go through an experience, whereas in the way in which Sophia Loren once said with Peter Sellers, your heart goes boom, boody, boom, boody, boom, boody, boom. You know, any guy who goes into priesthood without knowing that is going to find, well, it's going to happen at some stage. How's he going to handle it then? So every life is different. Every person is different. But I think I think it has the capacity, because it's imposed, to cause a lot of problems. And in terms of personal fulfilment, balance, common sense, commitment, the way we've had lots of alcoholic priests, and I often reckon the two things are probably combined along the way. That's a very lengthy answer to a very basic question, Tom.
Since you chose the word innovation as a prompt for part of your comments tonight, today I attended a luncheon with one of the executives from Google. She was actually visiting Melbourne at the moment, but she spoke at a forum at which she spoke about Google with one of their mantras is essentially one of innovation. When you look at an organisation like Google and the way it's continuing to reinvent itself, and I'm also thinking of Lynn's comments earlier about us as a species always needing to be driving for that innovation and things as well. One of the challenges she spoke about for Google as an organisation and for her as an executive is the fact that as an executive she's actually measured by the fact of whether she actually allocates 20% of the team's time for innovation. So it's actually a key requirement, a key performance measure of her role. I wonder whether for us as a species, part of our drive for improvement, in terms of like the technology or for moving faster or whatever, we also need that time for 20% of that time also for not just innovation, but thinking about how to do things better, faster, or with greater speed, but rather perhaps also contemplation. I also perhaps would throw to you the issue of the combative nature of our politics, perhaps with the opening comments of Dr. Lynn regarding Dr. Hewson, with the fact that our politics has become so much consumed by technology, media and things like that, but rather than less combative, we should in fact be looking at how can we actually work more in collaboration with people as well, and that perhaps our drive for growth, productivity growth and things as well, is perhaps part of that curse that we actually have. There's no real question in that as such. It's probably more of a reflection of my day today.
Sure.
About innovation and our drive for species on the one hand for improvement, but in a sense with our own fear of self-destruction, in a sense by not executing yet what cost that might be. So just
I would go at drawing a question then and a parallel around linking Lynn's comments about the need to be affiliative and also the need to find that quiet space, which traditionally church provided.
Yeah.
And there's then been a shift away from church attendance at a time when perhaps we do need, not so much the church, but the need to be quiet and still to restore ourselves. And I wonder then, under the banner of innovation, what do you see is the church's role to be innovative in a way that helps us to be quieter and to attract greater church attendance?
Well, church and innovation are not necessarily two words you would often use in one sentence. We do things pretty slowly, but you look at these things. Now, I had a particularly hectic day today, and I came back and I looked at the phone, and it had that little number on it, 36, saying that there have been 36, and I'd felt them because it was on silent. Now that was, I think 20 of them at least were the one person who suffers from anxiety, and she just kept at me until eventually I answered. But I mean, it's a real misnomer to call that a phone, isn't it? it's a computer. It's a portable computer that happens to be able to make phone calls on. But it has lifted the bar, going back to so I just pressed a button. I've got the voicemail running here. It has lifted the bar in terms of our life management almost overnight. And as to, sometimes I'll go through the messages, it can take me 10 minutes to get through the messages, just to write them down, and people got to get back to and so on. And it's the crowded nature of life which where we can often remember the great analogy, which can be linked to a lot of things, of the analogy of the little frog swimming around in the water on the stove, and the water is heated 1 degree. And he still keeps swimming around, and it's heated another degree, and he keeps swimming around. And of course the thing is, if it goes up 1 degree every couple of minutes or so, eventually the frog is dead, because the life has literally been boiled out of him. Life is no longer sustainable. We're really at a point where we need to be pretty careful, because we've never had less time, or we've never allowed ourselves less time. You look at Sunday, which was the day of rest, and there was no footy. And most of you are too young to remember this. You and I remember, Tom. There were no movies. There was, you might be able to go to a hotel for a meal in the hotel dining room. No shops, no nothing. It was the day of rest, and people had their Sunday roast, and they watched World of Sport, and they went out and mowed the lawn and washed the car, and sat around, and they didn't read a newspaper because there wasn't one, etc. So we've taken those away and yet you go back to Lynn's last point about the expenditure on what? Mental illness. So as we join the dots of even the things that we both, without any collusion, where we've been saying, that's the point, that we need that time of space. And church used to provide it, and even in church, and even in my own church, the reality of liturgy, we tend to fill it up with, not with noise necessarily, but we fill it up with music and dialogue. There's hardly any silence even in the church. There can be if you wait till afterwards, or if you come early, and that's good. Some people do, and particularly our church at St Mary's is a beautiful building that exudes that sense of God's presence and a sense of silence and quiet. But we've got to go out and manufacture this. It's not there. It's not there for the taking. And what was the old song years ago? The place where I worship is the wide open spaces built by the hand of the Lord. That was a sense of saying, yeah, you get out in the bush and you look around and you say, this is terrific, and it gives you a sense of God's presence. But it also gives you a sense of your own life and where it's going. And in all of the things, as we look at the cost of mental illness, and we realise that there is no time to take some space for ourselves or for others, or even just to think of, how is my life heading? I'm unhappy. Why am I unhappy? What should I be doing? What's gone wrong with this relationship? What did I say because I was short-tempered, because I was overtired? And I was overtired because I stayed up too late over the wretched computer, etc. Joining the dots of all of these things. And so, yeah, that need for space is just so important.
Can you please thank Father Kevin? I get a sense that perhaps finding that space is a bit like chasing a three-legged chicken. It's quite elusive and quite difficult to catch, and but there's something in it that says when you do catch it, it might be pretty tasty. So you could wish us well with that. I then wonder about in that, given the stimulus of tonight, the thought and the opportunity to think differently. I wonder if we gave you the opportunity just to help that land and share that with your next door neighbour again, just for a minute about what did you make of that, the so what piece? Could you please take a minute and build some community with the person next to you around what you thought of that?
I had a couple of thought about what you were and ideas and how very much the education system is limited creativity. Like one of my other one thing she's done doing, building, writing, use her imagination. It's school she's after. But I don't know if that doesn't matter. So, in terms of like children, innovation, it's like the way we really do encourage that creativity. We ask for more, and I think that come up with some powers.
Has it been different from an educational perspective? Has there been a time in the past where it did?
Okay, so great opportunity for those discussions to continue. We've got the venue booked until 8:30, so you've still got 15 minutes outside in the foyer to do that. But in the meantime, we've got a gift of appreciation for our two speakers tonight. Could you please again thank Father Kevin Dillon and Dr. Lynn Reader for sharing their thoughts with us. Thanks for your attendance. Like I said earlier at the introduction, these are to be a regular event, and if you liked what you heard, then please share that with others and invite them to come along. And if you had any ideas for speakers or topics or anything that you'd like to hear about, then please just send a note to the people that are on the listed on the program. And the next event is on the 13th of May. Thanks for coming. Have a great night.
And thanks for